does, but if there is a certain particular group of people who could be precluded and one of those partners was on that list, and they could substitute that, another person in that position and still keep their standing.
Right, and when that person is substituted, then business license has to do the due diligence to get their ownership information on them. Police would have to do their background check on them, which is why we wanted to make sure that application's complete. But that can discuss something really quickly now and see if there's any modifications we could make if that's council's desire.
Mr. Orr, we'll be cognizant of the fact that if some outstanding group does something, it makes sense to what you're saying.
Sure.
I don't know that we're gonna codify it, but.
And yes, Mr. Mayor, and I was just anticipating, not necessarily gaming, but a board that we haven't anticipated. Like I said, it just, I believe it was yesterday, that the medical board finally just weighed in and so in some places, there are physicians that have already submitted. And the modification could be something as simple as eliminate me from that application as one of the owners, one of the interested parties in this. While that's a modification that's very simple and striking, it would be upon you and your licensing team to determine the types of modifications in that regard. I think is different than someone coming and saying, I'd like my name to be deleted, as opposed to a company says, we're deleting this name, but we're adding these two names to make up for it. I think you do end up with some problems, but I think you should have some wiggle room to make those types of adjustments if you need to. That's the only suggestion I would make in that regard.
And the change of ownership concerns would actually be properly addressed in Title V, which are being introduced today but not being voted on. Because if there's any change, what you're voting on again today is the land use regulation, so any change of ownership wouldn't be considered by planning staff. This type of change that could potentially be rejected would be a change of location, not necessarily a change of ownership. Ownership and that information and the percentages would actually be considered in Title V, which you are not voting on tonight.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Okay. Yes.
You know what I was, have smart staff, don't you? So do I.
And one last thing, Mr. Mayor, on the issue on that Councilwoman Woods brought up on the vertical integration. And while I understand trying to keep your districts, your zoning areas separate, it makes sense. One perspective that I would bring is that with medical marijuana, it's a different product that's selling. It's not your ordinary widget, not shoes and things. It comes with some security concerns. We've all heard ad nauseum since last session. And one of the benefits of having it all in one location is you eliminate one of those security concerns, which is transportation. And if you have a business that says, I'm growing these particular strains that are unique brand to our company, and I want to sell that, I can eliminate those particular security concerns by keeping it under the same roof, and I wouldn't have to worry about that. So that's just another thing to think about in that regard. I completely understand wanting to keep commercial and industrial separate, but this is a new way out. And so that's just something to consider when deliberating.
I think that we're probably gonna move on to something today, but we'll take that into consideration. And you know as well as I do that this could be modified within 2 weeks, and she's already put it on the record that she's interested in that too, so just recognize that we will be watching that. Is that fair enough to you?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item, which is item 33? Yes, I have Warren. Hopkins. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Warren Markowitz, 5620 Cricket Flag Court, Las Vegas. On behalf of myself and Nevada Alternative Medicine, I wanted to speak on two items, real brief. One happens to be what the gentleman before me has spoken into in regards to the vertical integration issue. It's a very big security matter to be able to contain the items all in one place, especially if we're going to be growing, producing, and dispensing the material. Transportation itself, based upon the regulations that have been promulgated by the other jurisdictions, require us to even disclose how we're going to be transporting it and what direction we're going to be traveling. Other industries that have similar problems, such as the armored car industry, precious gems, and gold bullion and so forth, don't disclose those items. They work closer with the police and code enforcement, but the disclosure of that information alone could make the product itself and the people involved with it a little bit more of a higher risk. So we'd like you to consider, even if it's a special use permit or a special waiver on a use permit, if an applicant puts forth a vertical model where it has 2 or 3 of the factors involved, to consider that, even if it's not, quote, zoned properly. The other issue I'd like to ask about is, since delivery is being allowed, doesn't make sense considering pharmacies, traditional pharmacies are allowed to have and operate drive-through windows during periods in which normal business hours are closed. Earlier this evening, the board had mentioned that the time restriction was going to be removed. We'd like you to consider that a drive-through window for possibly patients that have participated in the first vetting process, having a continual relationship with the dispensary, be made available. This would allow patients that have whatever excuse to access the dispensary at later hours to be able to do so. It would also increase the security for the people working there and eliminate the potential for theft itself between a limited transaction within the window, because there are security measures that are in place right now within the fast food industry as well as in the pharmacy industry.